This is the Neurosurgery Podcast.
Envy and love. Freud wrote in Civilization and Its Discontents, one of my favorite titles, by the way, in the history of writing, Civilization and Its Discontents. Great title. He said, "We soon realize that what we know to be useless but expect civilization to value is beauty." And so, living in a material world, it's easy to see things that we want. Neurosurgeons are compensated very well. We're sitting here in your beautiful house in Miami near the beach, surrounded by objects that you own, things that you've earned, things that you've been given as gifts or bought with your own money. And so I think the simplest place to start before we dive into maybe some less obvious facets of envy for neurosurgeons is material wealth. We come through medical school where we go into horrible debt. We go through residency where we're working like dogs for next to nothing. And we're surrounded by people our age who are advancing in corporate jobs or even finishing residency sooner, getting out of those salaries, and we see what they have and we say, I want that, I want that, I want that. How often do you feel envy at your level of this game?
So I mean, it's interesting, right? Because envy is a emotion, but the reality is that we can compartmentalize that into many different tranches. And let's start with material.
Yeah.
Okay. So here are the statistics on this, right? So in order to be in the top 2% in America, I think you have to make something like $340,000 a year. Now, obviously, those statistics are very much manipulated by some very extremes of wealth on the higher end, right?
Right.
But let's just say if you're making half the salary of a neurosurgeon, you're in the top 2% of Americans. And I think that the majority of us are in the top 1% of Americans. And just by way of comparison, in the world, if you're over 35,000 a year, then you're in the top 1% of the world.
Yeah.
So it's all relative. And the problem with the relativity of it is that it's a non-linear relationship. So I think what happens to people as they get older is they begin with a concept of, let's talk about material wealth now, of a linear relationship. And then very quickly after you finish residency, you enter the non-linear logarithmic. It's going to be the diminishing return slope of wealth, right? Or financial benefit.
Yeah.
So, the statistics used to show, I think if you make more money, you're happier up to about $70,000 a year. Adjusted for inflation, I think it's 160 now or 190 in that range. So anything over $190,000 a year is only very incrementally making you happier.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a very important statistic from a psychological standpoint. So all neurosurgeons, by definition, are far beyond this, unless you're in the 0.02% outlier group,
right,
on the bottom. So the discussion takes on a whole new relevance, right?
Right, because the root of envy, we're going to talk about greed,
Yeah.
right? But envy is more comparison, right?
Right.
And it's, if we're all within the pool of neurosurgeons who are all in that top echelon compared to everyone else, we're not comparing ourselves to a school teacher. We're not comparing ourselves to someone in the third world. We're comparing ourselves to our peers.
So it's funny because, if you let's take the world of vehicles. So everybody loves to talk about cars because cars are so accessible. And I know people are saying you're so wrong. Cars are very expensive. They're actually incredibly cheap. So if you wanted to get a most amazing car out there, you'd probably have to spend $200,000.
Mm-hmm.
Low-end Ferrari, right? Brand new. Used, you can get a very high-end car, right, for $200,000,
Yeah.
right? So that break point is $200,000. If you're buying a $250,000 car, you're like, people are turning heads. Lamborghini, whatever. But in the boat world, that's nothing. Like, I got a 26-foot Sportsman out back. It's, it's beautiful, but it's like 26 foot. You pull up next to a 40-footer, it's logarithmic. So it's exponential. So that boat is, $200,000. A 40-foot boat is $700,000, right? And you go to a 50-foot boat and it's, new, you could be into the 6 million range. Then you go to Jeff Bezos's 150, 200-foot yacht. Now you're talking about a $20 million, $40 million vessel, right? So cars are stupid, actually, in the neurosurgery world. Planes, let's forget about boats, let's go to the next level. The most breakdown, loser, garbage Cessna plane, how much do you think it cost you?
I can't even conceive what a plane would cost.
Like 700,000?
Yeah.
And then you go to jet from prop, then you got turboprop, you got jet propeller, and you got true jets, and then the cost of upkeep, right? So our boat costs, they usually say 10% of the value of the vehicle per year on recurrence. So if you have a $200,000 boat, expect to spend $20,000 a year maintaining it. That's not depreciation. If you have $1 million boat, expect to spend $100,000 a year just taking care of it, replacing shit, stuff like that, insurance, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're in this material wealth tranche of being a neurosurgeon, it's extremely difficult because, sure, now all of your friends are, venture capital guys or they're law partners, and they're working a lot less than we are maybe, and they're making a lot more money. So it leads to dissatisfaction. So one of my good friends, Bob Watkins in LA, he's the most famous sports surgeon in the country. And his son, Bob Watkins Jr., shout out to him. They're both in Santa Monica. He used to tell me, Mike, never count another man's money. Right? That's the envy point. Like, if you're in a dick measuring contest, at the low level, it's linear, meaning, a resident has this, another resident has that. That's the linear phase.
Yeah.
But when you're beyond that, when you're an attending, it's impossible. So I'll tell you a story, because I don't want to wax too poetic about envy. So it has to do, what was the opposite of envy? It was love.
Love, interestingly. And actually,
is it really?
I had the same reaction, right? Because we don't think about love in this context. We think about it romantically. But I think one of the facets of love that isn't often discussed in popular culture and romance and sex and passion is the charitable side of it, right? And so...
More like charity, right?
Yeah, which we'll get to later with Creed, but I think the way I have come to understand love in this setting is envy. You look at a person and what they have and you say, I want what you have, right? The love angle of it looks at someone and what they have, and you, I'm so happy for you that you have that, right? That's the converse of it, if you will. Not that I want what you have, but I'm happy for you. I'm so glad you have that.
So I had an epiphany once with my kids. I was like, the way you can measure if you love some living organism is if seeing them eat makes you happy. So when I see my kids eat, I feel very happy. When I see my dog eat, I'm like, oh, the dog's enjoying the food, right?
Yeah.
And you don't care about other people eating, obviously. We eat around other people. But going back to this, I want to tell a brief story. I'm sorry. From my LA times. This is many, many moons ago. So I was a young attending at USC. I was about 4 years in, and I was starting to make a name for myself. And I was really, I was running 2 rooms. I was doing 500 cases a year and really blowing the place up. And I get a phone call from a very famous graduate of USC who's one of the most successful in the history of the program, local guy. And he calls me up, and this guy had billboards everywhere, neurosurgeon. He goes, Mike, I'd like for you to talk to me about your future. I'd like to have, and he was at the time like in his probably late 40s, early 50s, so starting to bring in partners and stuff, very confident in himself. Yeah. So I went to this place, and it was not like my house here. This is like a $20 million house, right? This is in Pasadena, right? And we're having dinner, and it was one of those weird, awkward things where there was like servants,
Oh.
And after dinner, he said, "Listen, I want to show you some of my collections." I said, "Really?"
Collections, plural.
Yeah. So there was a room, and there's all these drawers, and pulls out these minerals, right? And he hands one to me. He goes, "Be careful with that." But I'm like, "This guy got a rock collection." And me being such an idiot, right? So this is what's great when you're young. You can be an idiot. I said, my sons collect rocks too. Right? They love rocks. They love minerals, right? He goes, Mike, please, these are meteorites. Now I'm so stupid, right? Meteorites are exceptionally hard to find and exceptionally valuable for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
The rarity, of course, being part of it. And the only thing that occurred to me at that time was I was talking to Lex Luthor. Like in the original Superman, right? When Gene Hackman has the kryptonite in his drawer, right? And I was like, holy fucking shit. This guy is so bored with his life that he collects space rocks.
Yeah.
I'm saving lives. Now, you could argue that I'm the idiot, right? These are obviously appreciating and value tremendously.
Right.
Right? Well, I'm talking about going to do another surgery on someone with Medicare or whatever, Medicaid. And I said to myself, I never want to be that bored. Now,
Yeah.
that was me. Maybe it's pride, right? This is the pride coming out. Like, ego defense mechanism up, right? Because
Right.
I don't have any space rocks. But it brings that up. People respond to material. It's like the love languages. How do you respond to material goods? Now, envy can be about envy of relationships,
Yeah.
right? Like you have a great relationship. I envy that, right? But from the material side, I think it's the most relevant, right? Most immediate.
Yeah, it's certainly the one that we can see and feel most easily in our day-to-day lives. But it's interesting you talk about the billboards that he had, and we were talking before in our pride conversation about getting credit for things
Yeah.
that you do, and for the people that you train, and for the work you do behind the scenes or out front. And so I think maybe after physical goods and monetary wealth and that level of achievement, there's public acclaim, right? And so how many of us have had a coworker, a classmate, a partner who gets credit for something that you helped with, right?
Steve Giannotti used to say this. Shout out to Dr. Giannotti, who's retired. He's basically retired. I think he's chair at USC. He used to say when they put a billboard up with a surgeon's face on it, that's only for the surgeon to look at. And he was right, because actually I don't want patients seeing my face up there, because a handful of my patients, they're not so happy with me in spine. They're really not. And there's no way around this for us. And I think that you're right. I mean, it's almost like the billboards go up because we want them to represent to the world how important we are.
Yeah.
And back in USC, again, I go back to USC days, when I first started, all the young doctors are so worried about being busy. So worried. And Bob Spencer told me once, when you finish, you want to come out with guns blaring, but don't. And so I went to all these, they set up these things at like a Marriott in a ballroom, like, come here, discussions about back pain. And I'd get up there on stage with PowerPoint and talk about back pain, and it'd be like 500 people in the audience, right? Yeah. And these were not doctors, these were potential patients. And you know what happened from all that? And being on TV and all that, I go on TV, talk about what I'm doing in LA. You know what happened?
What?
My clinic got filled by people with multiple sclerosis,
Yeah.
people who had been paralyzed with a gunshot wound 20 years earlier. All
Yeah.
these people said, I saw you on TV, you're the doctor, I know, I saw you, you're gonna be saving me.
Yeah.
And then you're like, holy shit, what have I done with this?
Right. And so, I mean, another good lesson to, you look at someone who's got their face out there, you feel envy. Well, you have no idea what it's like to be that person, right? But what I started thinking about, envy, that motivation, it can, like all of these, it can lead to good or ill, right? If I see someone who's out there killing it and got a great house, good family, kids are going to good school, thriving practice, I can think, I want that. And that can motivate me in a healthy way. Be like, oh, look, it's a success story. I can walk that path. And so there's a healthy kind of desire that can spark, a motivation, if you will, encouragement. But let's say I feel that pathologic envy, the evil envy. That's in a moment, right? You see the billboard, you see the guy with the flashy car, that's in a moment. But what does that become long-term? It festers, and I think it becomes resentment.
Yeah.
I think resentment is like the chronic phase of envy, if you will, right? You see time and again, and you say, I want that, but I don't have it. I want that, but I don't have it. I deserve it, but I don't have it. And it makes you hate that person. It makes you hate them for having what you think
The opposite
should
of
be
love.
yours, the opposite of love, right? And so everyone says that residency is a marathon, not a sprint. Our careers are decades long. It's easy, I think, to accrue resentments because many times, just like we talked about wins and losses, how often do you get appropriate gratitude versus when our job is thankless, right? And so if you go out looking for it, or if you don't shift your focus to the times you are rewarded and acknowledged, I think it's easy to foster a bed of resentment against your colleagues who get credits for things, against the people who are further down the road for you. You don't seem like a particularly resentful person to me. Having known you, you're much further down the road. How do you as you've navigated this career and you've made it through the different levels of your profession, how did you try to avoid that?
Well, first of all, my wife's very important, right? Amy is my counselor. She's my confidant. She's an amazing person. She's so involved with neurosurgery. That makes everything easier for me.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the things for the people who may be experiencing a good bit of this, and it's not uncommon, as you say, is I was thinking about a handful of years ago when Kate Spade hung herself and Robin Williams killed himself right around the same time.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, wow, of all the people, like I can understand, you know, like some of these Hollywood actors that overdose, like Marilyn Monroe or like, you know, Heath Ledger, but this was different. There's a comedian, and Kate Spade was incredibly successful as a woman and CEO. And you don't really know what's going on in those other people's lives. And this is where social media really gets to be evil. Like, how many people on social media posting about all their shit days?
Right.
I'd like to see that, right?
Right.
Because that would be much more honest. And it's so easy to just pick at, you know, grouse about what people have that you don't have. And that's what makes us successful, as you've already indicated. But I think it's always important to realize that you have no fucking clue what kind of bullshit people are dealing with. Your chairman, right?
Yeah.
Your partner, right? I mean, your business partner, right? Your senior resident, your junior resident.
Yeah.
It's full of that all the time. But the human nature, of course, is not inclined to look at it that way.
Yeah. I mean, there's that famous Elon Musk quote where he says, you know, everybody wants, they look at me, I have all this money, I'm so successful. You have no idea what it's like, and my mind's constantly racing. You don't want to be me. You don't want to be me.
Very few people can handle that.
And it's easy to look at someone and want what they have and completely divorce yourself from the reality of being the person who has that.
That's why we see so many people who are young who want to be neurosurgeons, and then you and I look at them and we're like, I'm not sure this is the right field for you. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not the arbiter, but this is not clear to us.
To be a neurosurgeon, you have to be a neurosurgeon and become a neurosurgeon. It's not, I always quote you can't just slap a patch on your shoulder and say you're an astronaut. You have to actually be it if you want the title, right? And I think, you know, you talk about social media. Jonathan Haidt, he's a psychologist, a social psychologist. He is,
Genius.
Jordan Peterson may be the most misunderstood public intellectual of the past 20 years of this century, you could say. Jonathan Haidt, not even to diminish, he's been very successful. He makes the rounds on every TV show, talk show, podcast. He has books that are bestsellers. I wish he were a million times more successful in getting his message out there. The
left hates him, so...
Right. But, I mean, thankfully he's been having some success lately in school policies. He has been writing about the effect that social media has been having on children in the developed world, particularly young girls before puberty, before high school, who are getting on social media, and it is devastating their psychological development because of what we're talking about here, the envy, the comparison.
Yeah.
And not just that, bullying happens, 24/7 bullying, you can't get away from it, but there is a significant component where you get on the phone and you see thousands of perfect people with perfect lives, and you're too young or inexperienced or psychologically vulnerable to realize it's a staged photo with 1,000 filters and Photoshop and touch-up. They're laying on $1 million car that they rented for the photo shoot. Like, it's all fake.
They were doing that right across the canal from us for the last 2 days.
Yeah.
Doing all this stuff. And you know what? I mean, you and I are old enough, experienced enough, and disagreeable enough to realize that they're not that perfect.
Right.
In other words, you with the duck lips and the, like, that's incredibly unattractive. But it is changing the social fabric. And Jonathan Haidt, is he Cornell or Columbia?
I think NYU.
NYU?
I
Okay.
think.
Along with Prof G.
Yeah.
I love Scott Galloway.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah, he's great. A lot of these great people are trying to rescue our youth. Look, envy is, as you say, it's so dangerous because it can smolder so much better.
Yeah.
And it almost seems like a natural inclination and a passable one. Gossip and envy go together, and envy can build in a structured, in a much more structured way, right? But here's the thing about neurosurgeons. I think that, again, just like with pride, the envy drives you too. The envy makes you want to be that much better. That surgeon has a better skill set than me. I would desire to be like that person, which is slightly different than envy. It's a parallel emotion. But I think the problem is that most people just don't have context. So the way to conquer the envy problem is to contextualize it. In other words, what am I really saying about what I want, right?
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, this probably will ring hollow to people out there who are younger, but I'll tell you the truth on this. Every neurosurgeon's going to make more money than they're ever going to frickin' need, and if it's not enough, you got a big fucking problem that nobody's going to solve for you, and you probably shouldn't be a neurosurgeon. But, you know, and by the way, out of the 5 love languages, my number 1 love language is material goods, but I no longer care about any material goods. I really don't care about them, because you come to a realization, because first of all, nobody's in want.
Right.
None of us are in want. And second, they don't mean actually anything.
Yeah.
When you see the kind of carnage that the diseases we treat afflict on people. So another story.
As an object, right?
Exactly. So at USC, one of my first clinics, I was young attending, and I used to see clinic in an office, like a real office with a desk.
Yeah. And
so I'd sit across from a patient, and this older man comes in, and he was actually a very, very well-known person and exceedingly wealthy. And he was about 67, and I was talking about his spine problems. And he says to me, he goes, and at the time, I was one of the most poorly paid spine surgeons in the world, in the country, I don't want to say the world, truly, for the amount of work I did. He said, I would give everything I own to trade places with you. And I laughed at him. I said, oh, come on, you don't need that. And I knew what he was worth. Yeah. It was 9 figures. He goes, I would give it every dime to trade places with you. And I didn't even understand what he meant. But I totally understand now.
Youth.
Health, potential, opportunity, everything that most of the people listening to us have.
Yeah.
In spades.
Well, I mean, I often think back, it's a quote of a quote, but the first season we did of this show in 2019 in San Francisco at CNS, we had Dr. Haid on, Reg Haid, talking about family and making time for what's important. And I think of him quoting, I believe he said it was Kevin Foley, who said, people will tell you time is money. They couldn't be more wrong.
Yeah.
Time is time.
Yes.
Money is money.
Right. And
you can turn time into money, but you can't turn money into time. I think about those words, Dr. Haid and Dr. Foley, if you're out there and it was you, Dr. Foley, who said that, I think about that at least once a month, maybe every week or so. Sage words.
Yes.
And
from people who have been successful beyond the 99th percentile of neurosurgeons in that realm.
Right. I mean,
and that's not speaking out of school.
Everybody knows this. I mean, listen to people when they tell you something they think is true, especially if they've been really successful and they've been around for a while. Like, somewhere out there, wisdom might be, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. But that's what I've often thought this too. Like, knowledge, reason, experience, these are all things you can find inside of yourself. You never find wisdom inside yourself. Yeah. Wisdom always comes from out there, right?
That's right.
Like wise words. And I do want to put a pin, and as a PSA for our listeners, if you don't know Jonathan Haidt's work, please go read it. I'll link to stuff with this episode. You could listen to him talk in an interview. You could read his book. However you consume things, please familiarize yourself with his work, especially if you have children or just care about the world as more children are born. If we don't focus on the next generation to come and thereafter, what is the point of any of this, right? So I'll link to that, but I think appropriately, as we kind of zoomed out in this sin of envy and we constrict back into our lives, perhaps a curveball that we might not think about. We've talked about money, we've talked about social status, getting credit for things. I want to get really specific because it's July, and I think one of the easiest ways that the young people in neurosurgery are tempted by the sin of envy is in the match, right? Because it feels at the time like a life-defining, a career-defining event, which in many ways it is, because it is your life, and that's 7 years, right? And you only get one life. There's only one history of your life, right? And so how many of us meet the person who's going to become your spouse and build a family with in residency? You live in a place for 7 years.
Yep.
You're far from your family or close to them. You train with the people you train with or don't, and they mentor you. Your career becomes what it becomes. Like, it is a huge event that you have this much control over.
Like, if Gooby trained here, this never would have happened.
Perhaps.
I don't think it would.
Well, you wouldn't allow it, right?
Yes, it wouldn't be allowed because he would have directed appropriately or
Right.
trained to deal with his own understanding of spine.
Right. And so this is, and now I'm only 5-6 years into the program side of the match, and every year there's, and it's already, in 5 years, it's been a steep drop off where every year there's an applicant who I get really invested in. I think, oh man, this is the one.
Yeah.
This is the next coming. This person is going to change the greatest resident in the history of Rush, and they go somewhere else. And the first year, I was devastated.
Well, I felt that way about you. When you didn't come to
No.
Miami, and no, I felt that way because you know how few students I will work with.
Yes.
And so just...
And maybe one day we'll do a podcast
It's a transitive
about,
property.
Maybe one day we'll do a podcast about why I didn't stay.
Well, okay, yes, we should, but can we just say this to people listening because it's going to be striking a chord for those who didn't match,
Yeah.
okay?
Talk about envy.
Yeah. So, first of all, it is life-defining, of course, but understand that, okay, maybe neurosurgery is not the right thing for you, but just the fact that you're on this road, even thinking about it, means like you tried out at the NFL Combine.
Yeah.
Remember that. Don't ever lose sight of that.
Yeah.
Right?
If you rang the bell at Buds, you were at Buds.
Yeah.
Right? Like, to get into Buds, you have to be,
Right.
like you could kill me with your pinky.
Right.
Right? So.
And for the people who think they matched maybe suboptimally, there are really no bad programs.
And this is exactly what I want to get into, because now, now 5 years out, last year there's somebody who, oh, this person's great, we really want them, and then they go to another good program, and now I'm like, oh, they're going to be great, I'll see them in a meeting in a few years, whatever.
Yeah.
But when you're the one matching,
Yeah.
and you don't wind up where you want it to be, it feels... Because I talk to people, they write to people who didn't match, we had someone on, people who don't go, and it's easy to sit back in that resentment, right? And that envy, oh, you got the spot at Barrow. Oh, you got the spot at Miami. Oh, I want to go to Miami, right? It's easy to sit back and look at these conventional...
By the way, shout out to Rick Kovatar, Alan Levy, Tim Yurkov on Doximity. We're ranked number 5 at Miami now.
There you go.
So, but we're coming for number 1 for the 4 programs that aren't better than us, but they're ranked better. So, sorry.
Envy.
Pride. Yes, envy and pride.
Right, but
And a little bit of wrath's coming.
wrath is always coming with you.
Wrath is always coming.
But that's where I wanted to land the plane, talking to the young people who might be watching and listening at this time of year, who feel like I'm not. And again, we're talking about envy, so they externalize and don't internalize it. They think, I didn't get what I deserve. I'm not in a place, I should be in a better place. Hopefully, we're busy enough that you don't have time for these thoughts, but I think it's a short path to walk down when something like the match happens that is so out of your control, and you've worked so hard, and you've had, this is my number 1.
Well, let me help with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so one applicant interviews with how many folks at a program like at Rush?
I did 20-something.
20 interviews at Rush? No, 20 people. How many people?
We interview, I want to say 40.
Okay.
Around there.
Right, you interviewed 40 with 40. No, I'm sorry. When you went to Rush to interview, you interviewed
Yeah.
with 8 attendings, 10 attendings, 5, 30.
Say 15-ish people between
Okay.
attendings versus.
So let's think about this rank list from a different perspective to
Yeah.
help cure the envy problem. You make your own rank list. You might counsel your sister or your professors or your mother, but the bottom line is you write those numbers down. On the program side, they've got a panel of 20 people, 10 people, 30 people, including the residents and all that, coming up with a collective rank of where they ought to be. So if I had to put money on who's more accurately looking at the situation, I want to put the program on that side.
Right.
Okay? So it's your job to making that rank list to make it with an understanding of how they see you to some degree.
Yeah.
Right? So viewed differently, the collective consciousness of neurosurgery is making a judgment about you.
Yeah.
Then you're expressing your desire. I would suggest that if you want to be successful in life, you would take into account that asymmetric knowledge deficit, experience deficit, the objectivity bias on your side. So, and I'm not saying don't grouse or be upset or whatever. I'm just saying that things happen for a reason.
Right.
Right. Now, if you didn't match, that's different because you don't want to be too discouraged by this.
Yeah, and I will say every time we talk about the match, it's my private personal PSA, be honest. The only way, to your point, where it's kind of a committee, and that's the department, that's the group saying who do we want to join us here. The only way, if you rank somewhere number 1 and you wind up at your number 4, and you're sad that you're not at your number 1, the only way you should feel like there's more you could have done to wind up at your number 1 is if you weren't honest. Because if you are completely honest about who you are, what you want to do, what you want to be, and the program didn't rank you to match, that means there's a mismatch between who you are and who that group is. And it's good that you didn't wind up there.
Yes.
Because if you're wholly honest and bare yourself to these departments and you match at that one, that means you matched with them. That means they looked at you into your heart and said, we want you.
Right.
You're one of us. Come on. And you're going to fit in.
Right.
And you're going to do well. And you're going to flourish in the right soil. So be honest. And then you should never, as long as you're honest and you're an honest broker, you should never feel envious or feel upset about the result because you did your part.
Right. Right. Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yes, and I will say, I think the final word for all of these aspects of envy is that what is it really born of? It's not what you see, but it's what you feel inside. And I'm not old enough to be a grumpy old man, but I think we have to say the word entitlement, right? You feel entitled to things. I look at someone who's very successful and has a bunch of money, and I feel like, well, that should be my money. I'm entitled to that, right? Well, they earned it, right? Yes. Or I wanted to match at my number 1 program and I didn't. I'm entitled to that. That was my number 1. I wanted that. And as you said, and I don't think I've ever heard anyone put it that way, but what did you say? You're coming from the program is in a position of judgment. The applicant is in a position of, what did you say?
Well, so it's an asymmetry of knowledge, experience, objectivity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because in the absence of that entitlement, it's admiration.
Yes.
Right? You look up to them, you say, that's a great place, but I'll never fit in there. And not that it's so binary and clear cut with what we do, but I do get a little upset about the whole thing about the spouses and people saying, I want to live on a coast in a big city. Like, you know what? Just get some fucking good training. How about that? Yeah. Like, go get trained, because if you got 7 years to get like a patchwork quilt of experience, and hopefully it's going to guide you for the future. You don't want to be a resident for 32 years. Yeah. And these people are just idiots. I mean, they're like, oh, well, it's not the fun city. Well, I can say this easily comes from Miami, right? Like, oh yeah, it's a great city. But look, the reality is we suffer from that too. In some ways, I'm very desirous of programs that are in shitty environments where the residents get super tough. There was that neurosurgery video went viral, like the day in the life of the neurosurgeon. Yeah. Where was that? Nebraska or something like that?
I don't know.
Oklahoma. It was
we'll find it and link to it. It's a great video.
It's a great video. It's a more rural program,
right?
And I'm like, these guys are so much tougher than our guys in some ways, or places where they study more and they do more research. So, there's pros and cons to everything.
Yeah, but I think that's that word you struck on, just as the envy and love dichotomy. I think resentment and admiration are kind of the chronic state, mental, spiritual, moral ways that you can develop if you walk down one road versus the other.
Yeah.
So next up, we're going to be marching along with the deadly sins, and gluttony, oh boy,
All right.
and temperance will be coming next.
All right, great.